to you because this is my first chance to do so publicly. Congratulations on your permanent appointment as President and CEO of the Ottawa Board of Trade. As a past chair of the Board of Trade, I'm really excited to see you in this role and know you're going to do great things. And I've really enjoyed the conversations that you and I have had over the last few weeks about your plans for the organization and also how you've responded to this particular crisis that is affecting every single business in Ottawa. So thank you for what you're doing, for the leadership that you and the board of directors are showing on this. It's been great so far.
Thank you, Mark, very much.
And hello, everybody. It's great to be with you from my home office, which is also my stepdaughter's bedroom, because it has a door that I can close to block out my kids, who I was just helping with their math work before we started our chat today. I'm glad so many people are able to join us today and be part of this, this discussion about the 5 stages of disaster recovery. And we're just going to share what those stages are right now. They are react, reassess, stabilize, recover, and reimagine. So again, react, reassess, stabilize, recover, and reimagine. And there you see them. And I know that many of the people in our audience will be at different stages of this, obviously. I think businesses throughout Ottawa are in many ways still reacting, but they are also further along this trajectory, many of them already thinking about a future now after the coronavirus and looking at new opportunities. And it's interesting. React is an interesting word because I was just listening to a podcast the other day about this, and there is a difference between react and respond. React is just a natural sort of instinct-driven kind of thing, whereas a response is something that's calculated and thoughtful. And I think a lot of businesses have moved from reaction to response now, and that's what we're going to talk about a lot today. But Jim Roach, I thought maybe we could start with you just to talk a little bit about these stages. And because you talk to so many business people on a regular basis, where do you feel that by and large people are at in this process of moving through the 5 stages? Oh, don't forget to unmute.
Got it?
Yeah.
How many times have we heard that on video calls? I think
yeah.
we needed. Sorry about that. Yeah, thanks, Mark. And thanks again for inviting us to participate in this. Suling, appreciate the opportunity. And congratulations as well on your appointment. That's fantastic. Where are businesses? We've actually done a bit of a survey, which Colleen will present in a few minutes. But I think most businesses are out of the react phase. We use the word react because I think your assessment is accurate, that it's really what we mean is respond, but it's a quick response. It's in reaction to the immediate threat that businesses have experienced. You need to do things like conserve cash, or you need to look at what your likely revenues are going to be in the short term. Some businesses saw their revenues collapse to 0, many businesses, unfortunately. Some businesses were fortunate enough to see their revenues actually increase as a result of COVID-19. So the reaction in those 2 cases is obviously very different. What we've seen in the last 6 weeks to 2 months as companies have dealt with those changes is that most businesses are moving into the reassess and stabilize mode. One thing I should point out, though, is that this 5-stage model is not intended to be a linear progression from one stage to the other. We can't think about the next stage until we finish this stage. So a lot of businesses are thinking about the Reimagine phase in the middle of reacting. I'll give you a concrete example of that. One of our local businesses is Le Groupe Nordique. Actually, they're local, but they have spas elsewhere in North America. They're the largest spa in North America. I don't know if you knew that. And their revenues went from a very healthy number to 0. And of course, they started losing money immediately. I was talking to the owner and the co-owner and CEO of the organization, Martin Paquette. And right out of the gate, when we entered the lockdown, he was starting to think about how he could reimagine his business for when the spa reopened. So that's an example of somebody who was in the middle of reacting, who was thinking about reimagining.
Great example. And I like what you said there, Jim, because I think it is important to emphasize that you don't spend all your time in one of these spaces, then move on to the next one, spend all your time there. It's this sort of iterative process, and you're reacting, reassessing, stabilizing, reacting a bit more, reassessing some more, stabilizing. Colleen, did you want to add some thoughts to this about these stages and where you think people are at in this progression, what you're seeing out there in the business community?
Thank you, Mark, and thank you, everybody. Good morning. So just want to build off a little bit about what Jim and Mark were talking about. We actually conducted a really quick survey with our network, and what I'd like to do this morning is share some of those results with you. And it's really building off of the 5 stages of recovery that Mark described for you. And really, again, this is just a framework to provide some structure as we're coping through this pandemic crisis, which is really an unstructured and very uncertain times. So the chart that you've got on and that you should all see really is answering 2 questions that I want to share with you. And the first thing we asked folks was, what stage do you think you are now? So if you think about the 5 stages we talked about, and what this is really telling us is that over 50% of the respondents are saying that they're in the stabilized phase. However, it's interesting to note that some people are in the react and assess phase, and others are in the reimagine and recover phase. And just like Jim mentioned, it isn't linear, so you could be going back and forth, but certainly people have progressed through that process or through that framework a little bit. And I'm certain, it would be very dependent on your individual circumstances and perhaps even what industry you're in. It'd probably be worth noting that the survey did cover many sectors. So it was technology, manufacturing, professional services, education, healthcare. So it is very much a cross section of industries or sectors. So that's the pie chart on the left that's telling us essentially where people were at. The second question we asked them was, when do you think you're going to move to the next phase? And certainly this is anyone's guess. We don't know exactly how things are going to play out and when you're going to move to a next phase. But the timeframes here are basically saying about less than 25% are saying within the next 4 weeks, they're going to move on to the next phase, whatever that is for them. A high percentage, 36% said that they're going to go probably between 4 and 8 weeks. So within a couple months, they're going to move into the next phase. And then you can see the results, as it displays out there. Interesting though, the other, which is about 16%, even some people think that it's going to be a year before they move into the next phase. So some longer period of time, not certainly within the next quarter. So again, probably dependent on your circumstances and your industry, but you can get a kind of a view of what people are thinking. And then just very quickly, the other question that we asked people is, what's keeping you up at night? And you can see the word cloud there at the bottom, but I'll give you some of the themes that came out of that. And it probably be some stuff that we want to build off of as we have our conversation. But second wave of pandemic. So certainly that's top of mind for people. Cash flow, again, very top of mind. Supporting employees, anything digital. Products, services, productivity, that's a big theme. And then impact on customers would be another big theme. Certainly the sales funnel, revenue, customer retention, all those types of things. And then finally, a couple more around the market. So product development, the impact to your product development plans, and then changing competition, which I think is really something to be aware of. And then the other interesting one I thought was the lack of accurate information, which is a really good point. So again, we'll share the survey results with folks, but just wanted to give you some context to really support our discussions. So with that, I'll pass it back to you, Mark.
Okay, and just quickly, Colleen, what do you make of that? What's your reaction when you see those results?
Not too surprising. I think one of the conclusions for me is that it is really dependent on your circumstance, right? Some people, we have client examples where this has created opportunities for them. Certainly people in healthcare and health tech type companies. they're hiring. I was talking to a client that's hiring at a rate of 30%, right? Like they've added 30% in their, their staff, right? So they've got scale problems coming out of the yin yang versus people who have had to let go 70% of their workforce, right? So again, I think it's very independent or dependent on the company. And I think most of these themes, if you will, are things that are probably worrisome to most people.
Yeah.
And it's really, how do you navigate that as we get into this next phase?
All right, let's bring Mike and Mark into the discussion as well. Mark, what are you hearing out there, and what's your sense of where businesses are at and how they're starting to move through these steps and get to a point of reimagining the future?
Well, what I think this has caused is certainly it's really accelerating digital transformation, and the companies that I've worked with and talked to, who already were digitally transformed, are just absolutely thriving. They're the ones that are growing. The ones that are embracing it will be thriving, and the ones that are resisting it are actually in decline. So that's the big trend. Obviously, the one we heard, was working at home online, and a big impact is in the food industry. And some of the companies are now, completely moving to deliveries at home and takeout, and that's how they're pivoting. Online commerce is booming. It used to be about 16% of business. It's going to be mushrooming, and the businesses I've talked to, most who are thriving are opening up, online commerce. And then, you got to wonder what the impact will be on auto industry and commercial real estate as more people work at home. You've got two people working at home. You may not need two cars. So and also the other thing that was, I think someone mentioned, was there's a huge increase focus on people, on retaining and attracting people, because what we've had is volatility, uncertainty, complexity, ambiguity, and that causes stress in people. And businesses are quite concerned about the future, and they need the people to help them move forward in the future.
Mike, how about you? What are you seeing out there?
Yeah, well, I'm largely working with product and companies as opposed to a services company. And obviously the services company, the impact was pretty much immediate. And so that's a different plan in many ways. The companies that I'm spending most of my time with have a bit of a flywheel effect. So their business is still continuing. Their biggest concern, of course, is how long will that flywheel continue to operate? Because if this is a long, protracted shutdown or slow or very slow recovery, then it will hit them. If it doesn't, then they're going to come through it reasonably okay. The other aspect that I find very fascinating is how do we get employees back to work when we decide to? And frankly, in many cases, they're already back to work because of the essential service nature of some of these companies. In that environment, how do you create a situation where the employees feel reasonably safe to go to work? Because I'm certainly not going to be rushing back into restaurants. I know when they open up, and that's unfortunate because I love the pubs and the bars. And in a work environment, the same thing applies. If you're going to work very worried that the guy next to you has a virus, or girl next to you has a virus, you're going to not want to go to work, or you're not going to work very effectively. So it really behooves companies now, as they start to look at how they recover, how they can create an environment where people feel that they're almost as safe as they are at home. And that's everything from sourcing the personal protective equipment to creating protocols at work, which are clearly somewhat based on paranoia, which is a healthy thing, through to just lots of communication. So I'm finding that's something that's not really getting a lot of attention in the companies that I've talked to, with a couple of exceptions where they're actually well down that path. So to everyone else's point, a real variety of different stages for the different companies.
Yeah.
The product and companies I'm working with tend to be already moving forward and moving into a recovery path.
Jim, since so many of the people who answered the survey were in the stabilize stage of recovery. Let's talk a little bit about that space for a moment. Obviously, that has a lot to do with, well, there's so many different things to that. Obviously, cash flow is one of them, maintaining contact with customers, still trying to do some business, assessing what government programs you're eligible for, and figuring out how to access them. Lots of things going on there. What do you think are some of the critical components of that stage?
Big question. I think one of the critical things is to stay connected with customers. We're like Mark Rambois said, we're operating in a period of uncertainty and with a lack of information about what the future is going to hold for us. So a lot of companies are building their plans around scenarios. What if this happens? What if that happens? How do we respond? In order to know which scenario is evolving as the likeliest scenario, we need to stay connected with the people that are going to most likely affect the scenario, which in most companies' cases is customers. I really also like the comment about the companies that can pivoting towards a digital or online presence for their business model, but that extends as well for how they're connecting with people. So how people are marketing. As an example of that, I've seen so many companies double down on their investment around videos to help communicate the value proposition of their products. So the stabilized period is really trying to figure out what's coming down the pipe, knowing that we don't have perfect information, but staying connected with customers and markets such that we can transition our models to the emergent ones.
That's a great point. Colleen, what do you think about this phase? Because I know for a lot of people, there's, when you're in that phase, when you're in the stabilizing phase, it can be never ending, right? So how do you find the time to stabilize your business, keep it going on some level, have that core team in place, be serving the customers that are still doing business with you, and at the same time, find a way to break out of it into one of the next couple of stages to be able to lead your company into the future?
Yeah, that's a really good question, Mark. And it's probably something that people struggle with on a day-to-day basis, even pre-COVID, right? How do you work on the business when you're so focused on running the business? And, frankly, for me, being remote and being at home has created an opportunity to actually work on the business more. I think the lack of commute time, those types of, condensing that has created for me some focus and created a time, allowed me to create some time to actually work on it. And somebody said this a long time ago when this all started, is in fact, we've been given the gift of time. And so to me, we really need to take that opportunity and create something of it. If I even think of my house, I mean, I've cleaned more cupboards in the last 2 months than I have in the last 2 years. And it's just like, I have to, and it's an opportunity, so I need to do it. And so I think it's the same with your business, right? And like anything, you need to schedule it in, right? I think that, for me, that's a bit of a trick, right? I think we were talking earlier how everybody's just Zoom meeting to Zoom meeting, hour and hour and hour, but I think you just have to carve out that time and you have to prioritize. But I think there is an opportunity here. And I think the risk is if we don't take this, we may not become relevant. I think we need to focus. We talked about some of the things that keep people up at night, and it's like, what is the competition going to look like? What is our clients going to look like? Our customers in the future? And if we're not thinking about those things now, it could be quite detrimental to our future.
Great points. Mark, I was a part of a discussion at Invest Ottawa recently where we were talking about how in a way the business you used to own before March the 1st, let's say, doesn't exist anymore, and you kind of have to operate like you have a new business now that you're almost just starting this new business and moving forward. Is that the way you look at it? And what are some of the critical questions you think company leaders need to be asking themselves right now?
Well, certainly this is going to force the creation of an era of innovation. And when I talk about innovation, I'm talking not, product is the easy one, but really it's the business model Look at Uber, the processes, services, policy. So one of the questions I'd ask is, what do your customers hate about some of your processes? And can you apply technology to remove non-value added tasks? Apps really increase the value of a business. There was an interesting a survey that said that 88% of CEOs think innovation is important. On average, 60% of their business now needs to change because of this, but only 22% have a formal process of innovation. So what innovation process can you put in? How do you involve your people? Because major change is definitely needed.
And Mark,
Mike,
if I could just
go ahead,
jump in
Colleen.
for a second.
Yeah.
I just want to piggybacking off the other Mark's comments. We have actually a client who's taken this opportunity to do a customer journey map. So exactly what Mark is talking about. They're going to, map their current customer journey, understand that process. They have the moments of truth as kind of a terminology in that, but where is the non-value added activity and how can you improve that? And then also, tie in your digital platform. So I think that is a really interesting project for people to contemplate.
Interesting. Mike?
Well, I just continue with that theme that Mark's brought up here, the idea of taking advantage of this time and thinking about how you can do things differently. And so I'll just throw a couple of examples. One obvious one that people talk about is supply chain. Good chance it was interrupted in this last few months. Another one would be how do you get lead generation and perhaps the world of trade shows and events, certainly for the foreseeable future, is going away. So that's a lot of money that you have probably budgeted. How can you more effectively reutilize that? And it could be something as simple as putting more investment and time into content creation that you can use for webinars or presentations. So that sort of, down grassroots thinking, I think, has to take place and is taking place.
Yeah, I think what I'm hearing, and Jim, maybe you can speak to this a little bit, there's kind of there's a reset button that's been pushed here. And I think there's also a reevaluation that's going on in a lot of ways by people. And one of the things I think about is, this is an opportunity for a lot of companies to reevaluate all the relationships they have, all the things they're doing, and perhaps even, it's a bit of a clearinghouse kind of time, right? That there's you're sort of saying, I was already thinking I might not do that anymore. Now I'm just going to stop doing it completely, right? And or I was already, had a tenuous relationship with that supplier or that service provider. I'm going to reevaluate and find somebody in that space that is going to really deliver the results I want. And so that represents both risk and opportunity for everyone, doesn't it?
Yeah, for sure. So COVID-19 has created an environment in which people are more willing to bring about change, as you were just describing it. So the question is, how do we take advantage of that willingness in order to strengthen our businesses, strengthen our relationships, or, as you said, prune the bush of our business? I also think it's important to look at the short-term versus long-term investments that we're making in these kinds of transitions. So as an example, if you're running a restaurant, obviously your business is being devastated by COVID-19. Many restaurants have pivoted to providing online service. So it's takeout. So they're delivering, or you can pick it up at the restaurant. So that's a short-term reaction to COVID-19 because my customers can't come into my restaurant. But what's it going to look like longer term? Eventually, at some point, we'll have a vaccine or a cure for COVID-19, and life will resume similar to what it was back before the virus began spreading, the way it was in 2019. But some core elements are going to be fundamentally changed. Our use of technology like video conferencing, everyone in the, well, maybe not everyone, a lot of people in the world have learned how to use video conferencing more effectively. It's going to become a tool that will be, it's not going to be forgotten. It will proliferate and continue to evolve and become a core technology in our toolkits. How does that tool and tools like that affect us over the long term? So looking back at the restaurant business as an example, will fine dining go back to the way it was? Or will there be a component of fine dining that will be virtual or somehow affected differently? So this is what I think Mark was referring to when he was talking about innovation and thinking about the changes that our society may bring about in our businesses.
Yeah, the challenge, of course, is you asked some questions there, and it's hard to know what the answers are, right? Will people go back to fine dining, or will they be less inclined to do so? I'm sure a lot of people will, but and I can see the storyline of everybody rushing back because they've missed it so much and wanting to get together again, and I can also see the storyline of people being reticent because of the presumed risk.
Well, let me take that model a step further. So let's assume it goes back to normal. We're back to fine dining. How do these establishments communicate the value that they're delivering to their clients? Historically, there was a particular means of marketing and using word of mouth, et cetera, to communicate the value of the restaurant. I think the very mechanism by which these establishments communicate with their clients will change. We already started seeing that in 2019 and before with things like online presences. But I guess what I'm saying is, even if the delivery of the product is the same in 2021 as it was in 2019, the means by which you're communicating with and engaging with your clients will change.
Okay, Colleen, let's talk a little more about the subsequent stages, recover and reimagine. What do businesses, when they have the opportunity to do so, when they can lift their heads above just the stabilization of their operations and ensuring that they have enough cash flow to survive the next few months, what are the things they need to start doing to kind of recover and reimagine the future?
All right, thanks, Mark. So I think the recovery phase is really about scale. So it's about going back to something. It won't be what we had, it'll be something different, but it's going to be scale. You've got to scale, you've got to scale quickly. So like Mike Pasco said earlier, what does that look like for employees? I think the impact to employees is really, really significant and is going to take some serious thought and how we make that piece of scale. If I think of scale, we've got people, we've got process. So, what are the processes that have to change? And then we also have technology, which we've talked a lot about as well from the digital aspect. So I think those are all elements that really need to be addressed from a recovery stage, and the depth of that really depends on your organization. As you move into the reimagine phase, that's really a strategic view in my view. It's taking that strategic lens and looking at your business and what do you need to do to be viable in the future. And I think we've touched on it earlier, but looking at the competition is really important. Looking at your products and services, the innovation pieces. I think sales is always going to be a big, the sales and the customer piece of this is always going to be a big element that we need to understand and think through. How are we going to interact? Is it going to be different? And what does that look like? So I think, again, at a very high level, recovery is more about scale and the reimagine is more about strategy. And then there's specific elements in that as it ties to your business.
Mike, do you want to share some thoughts on that in terms of how businesses can emerge from this? And I think a lot of us are just looking for practical advice on, okay, I've got things under control, and I recognize that not everybody's in that situation yet, but a lot of companies are, that they're, thanks to some creative maneuvering and some government support, they've stabilized things. How do they move on from there?
Yeah, well, I'd pick up a bit, just carrying on that theme Colleen's just mentioned. I think most companies probably are at the stage now where their business plans are not worth the paper they're written on, or at least a good chunk of it isn't, especially if you've been hit particularly hard. And so it may be time to rethink that business plan. I mean, you need to do it anyway, just to determine how many people you can continue to hire and not hire. We're in a competitive world, and that's not going away, with the exception perhaps of some nonprofits. So in that world of competition, the way you recover is more important relative to your competitors' recovery. And so if you're thinking carefully about this, you might be doubling down on your investments in R&D, for example. I'm certainly working with one company that's doing that, knowing full well that that's going to cause them a bit of a hit on the profitability, but assuming that their competition isn't staying as quite as sharp, they're going to come out of it in a better position. And so in terms of, the idea of strategy or business plan development with strategy, I think it's time to relook at that. In terms of execution, there's a lot of new things happening here. I think both Mark, Jim, and Colleen have mentioned, using video, the ability to do things without having to travel and so on. So that execution stuff is changing as well. And so all of that has to come together and be rethought through. And you've got the other thing that sort of overrides all of this is communication. How effectively are you communicating to your customers now? So that they're still there, really important. And how effectively are you communicating to your employees? If they're not at work now, stay at home, as many of them are, hopefully you're communicating regularly with them because you need to keep them on side so that when you do get back to work, they're coming back to work with this confidence that you've done everything you can to make sure the experience they're going to have, the safety that they're going to be coming back into is there.
Yeah, that's a good point. And Mark, maybe you can speak to that a little bit. I think the kinds of relationships we have going forward with our customers and with our employees are going to change. So what's your sense of how they're going to change and what steps we need to take to continue to engage with both groups, even with some really different dynamics moving forward?
Well, I think one of the things to look at is if you're going to innovate is how might you use the trends, the compound trends in technology that's out there? How might that impact you and your people? For example, the drastic lowering in cost and increasing in power of GPS, computer power, batteries, digital imaging, 5G, artificial intelligence. So how can you use it? How can you help your people through this transformation? And also, most of the innovations, about 50% of the innovations of companies come from people, from your employees. So how do you engage them in that process? I heard one of the things that I saw was really interesting was how easy it is to do 3D printing, for example. You can do 3D printing at home. There's a boy in Calgary who uses 3D printer to make face shields for his local hospital. He's printing hundreds of them. So again, how do you get away from the metalworking to the softer, easier stuff, and just keeping the focus on the people?
Jim, I'm hoping to get your comments on this because I think there can sometimes be a bit of a tendency to oversimplify some of the changes that are going to result from this. And I think there is a complexity to a lot of this. So yes, of course, more, in the future, I think there are going to be more meetings like this one, and people aren't going to feel the compulsion to get together as much, but there is still the need sometimes to have the team together in the same room. And there are things that you lose from a collaborative perspective if you're not co-located. So how are we going to manage some of those nuances going forward, and what do business owners need to be mindful of as the world evolves?
Yeah, Mark, you're right. Business is a contact sport for the most part. But having said that, it will be, for most businesses, a fairly lengthy period of time before we're able to bring people back together in the way that you were just describing. And so we're going to have to make do with other techniques like this, video conferences. Going back to the concept of innovation for a second, I just wanted to make mention that some businesses are already very well disposed to innovate in times of change. So example, technology businesses where the technology is constantly changing have built an innovation capacity. And so maybe they're in a better position to be able to deal with the need for innovation in this period. Other businesses may find themselves in not having that inbuilt capacity. So how do those businesses and how do those business owners figure out how to innovate and take advantage of or respond to the circumstances that they find themselves in. So a couple of ideas there. One is to find and curate sources of information. So the sources of information that work for you in 2019 may not be the best sources of information for now. Finding the blog posts or the podcasts or the conferences like this one where ideas might stimulate your thinking and allow you to develop new innovative approaches to your business will be really important. Another really important thing to do will be to connect with other similar businesses and other business leaders who themselves are struggling with these concepts. So coming together as CEOs and business owners or executives in businesses and sharing ideas about how we're innovating. I'll give you a concrete example. So one of my friends runs Hindenburg Pottery. It has been devastated. Of course, revenues have gone to zero, similar to the way restaurants have been devastated. So I think there's a lot that Ginger, who runs Hindenburg Pottery, can learn from restaurants about how they're pivoting to use digital platforms. If she just tries to figure it out on her own, she may be very successful and probably will be because she's an amazing entrepreneur. But coordinating our efforts and benefiting from the thinking of others and building on each other's ideas, I think will be particularly important in this period.
All right, we're going to get to questions from the audience in just a couple of minutes, but I wanted to kind of go around the table one more time and ask everybody what you've been thinking about the future, what's been on your mind, what your expectations are, what you're reimagining. Mike, maybe we can start with you. What's your sense? And I know we're all guessing. None of us has a crystal ball at this moment, but and these are such unprecedented circumstances. But what's your sense of where opportunities are going to lie, or how the world will unfold differently from this point forward?
Oh, that's nothing like a difficult and broad-ranging question. I would just say off the top, a little bit of what I was saying before is trying to understand the opportunities that you can take advantage of quickly. I didn't mention things such as looking at your competition and considering M&A acquisitions. Partnerships could become more and more important going forward. So that's certainly part of my thinking as I talk to some of the companies I work with. But the other aspect, though, is a bit worrisome, and that is that how quickly will this recover? And there's lots of discussion in the news on this. But I think by and large, there's a recognition there probably will be a second wave, and so if that comes in the fall, we're going to get set back on our tushes again. So I'm a worry. I do worry about that, which is why whatever we end up doing here has to have some staying power, and cash flow will become important. So there's a lot of aspects to your question, Mark, and I would just say I'm hopeful, I'm optimistic that companies in this area will innovate their ideas. If I think about a restaurant, for example, if I had a small restaurant, I'd consider possibly, if people aren't coming to me, why don't I go to them and take dinner parties to them and things like that. So we have to be innovative. We have to think about different models, and I'm pretty positive about the capabilities of the team in Ottawa to do that. So that part's exciting, but I do have this underlying worry about how long this could stretch on, because that's impactful.
Right. So you're talking, I guess, about being prepared for a prolonged kind of COVID-19 phase, and then whatever comes after that, right?
Well, back to, I think others have mentioned it, you definitely need to be prepared for use more and more video. It's not going to go away overnight.
Yeah.
And how can you use that to your effect? Because if it is a longer period, and I suspect it won't happen, it won't end quickly. This is not going to be a V-shaped recovery. How long will the U stretch out is more likely the scenario. Then you need to, this is the new normal. And so we have to adjust to it. Okay,
Mark, your thoughts?
Yeah, I believe this is not going to go away until the majority of the population has access to vaccines. And so that's probably looking like 2 years from now. So, so if we're successful. So I think one of the things to look at to adjust is, particularly on the sales side, if you have an outside sales force, your sales force is used to traveling all over the place. If you're not just local, but you sell in the country and in the U.S., going to trade shows, as Mike mentioned, and meeting their customers and trying to close deals. That's going to be severely hampered from now on. Travel is going to be much more unpleasant. It wasn't pleasant to begin with, and it's going to be even worse. People having to wear masks, people distancing themselves. And the sales force is going to have to start using digital technology to start the sales process, not maybe the final close, but the getting together, the explanation of a proposal. So I think the reality will be physical distancing will be very present, and fear of getting this virus will be very present. So there'll be lots of reaction of, hey, don't come too close, or what kind of protective equipment I need. So the PPE industry is going to flourish, and I think people will start adopting that.
Okay, Colleen?
Yeah, I'm going to answer that kind of in a two-pronged approach. So one is that I agree with Mark. I think, and maybe I'll just answer in how I've been thinking about my consulting business. And so certainly we've been focused very much on automation, and I think automation of products, services, M&A are all things that we're thinking of very seriously. But piggybacking off on Mark's comment there, I think automation of inside sales, account management are things that we really have to think about because this is not going to, this is going to be the new normal for quite some time, and maybe for a long time. So how I do business with clients, I think, will change, and we're trying to prepare for that. On a personal level, I said earlier, we've been given this gift of time, and it's made me slow down a little bit. And frankly, I'm thinking a lot personally, what am I going to do when things start to open up? Am I going to start running around day in, day night, like just going so hard all the time? And maybe I need to rethink my schedule and how I manage. So I'm, on a personal level, I'm trying to rethink that a bit.
Okay, Jim, some final thoughts from you?
I agree with Mark that it's going to be a long process. I see Simon just posted in the chat that we may have a vaccine available in September. If that's the case, then we should see ourselves getting back to normal in the sort of back end of the year timeframe. But that's still 6 to 9 months out from now, depending on how quickly the vaccine, how effective the vaccine is, and how quickly it proliferates in our society. What am I thinking about in terms of what's changing? Well, one quick thing is the tool that we're using here, Zoom, and similar tools are going to evolve fast. So Microsoft, as an example, I'm sure has thousands of people now working on evolving Microsoft Teams. Zoom is going to do the same thing. And these tools are going to become more complex and more effective so that we can replace international travel with a much more nuanced approach to video conferencing. So an important thing will be for all of us to stay current with how this technology can be used for our interpersonal communications, both corporately as well as personally. Ultimately, though, we're going to kind of get back to a normal mode in 2021 or thereabouts. But some things will have fundamentally changed, like we said at the outset, like the use of video conferencing. Some other things will change that we may not be so obvious. I live on a courtyard, and I can look out my window now, and it seems like there are Purolator and Canada Post and FedEx trucks coming every minute. So I think that's a new normal for us. I think online purchasing and our willingness to buy stuff without necessarily touching it before we actually purchase it will increase. That willingness will increase and will become part of the new normal. And then underneath all of that, we have some of the major societal changes that I think some of them will be accelerated. And one thing that I'm particularly interested in is climate change. And we all know that climate change is it's a phenomenon that's going to affect us dramatically. It's already affecting us dramatically. Unlike COVID-19, it's not a sudden impact to our society that we need to react to. It's a long drawn out impact, but boy, oh boy, we have got to react. And I hope that as we recover from COVID-19, we as a society will start to think more about what we can do to affect climate change. How can we reduce our emissions as a society? And I'm hoping that some of the recovery efforts will be focused on that.
Great points. All right. Mark, Jim, Colleen, Mike, thank you. I'm going to hand it back to Lynn now, and I think we'll have some time for questions, but Lynn, you wanted to talk about a few things first?
I do. Just a few quick words. So first of all, thank you to the Stratford Managers Corporation CEO advisory team for sharing this morning. Amazing presentation and really appreciate it. I'd also like to thank once again our sponsors, that we could not do events like this without them. So I'd like to thank the Ottawa Citizen, our community partner. I would like to thank, of course, Stratford Managers Corporation for putting together this presentation and their time and investment to help out the business community. Thank you for your leadership. This is really appreciated. I'd also like to thank Media Mall Marketing, and I would like to also thank Enbridge Gas, who have also supported Ottawa Board of Trade events recently. Just a few quick notes on upcoming webinars. On April 30th, we're having a fireside chat with our President and CEO, Su-Ling Ching, and she is going to talk with Ottawa leadership gurus and business people, Steve Cody and Carla Briones. I'm very much looking forward to this. And on May the 5th, our good friends at EDC, BDC, and RBC are going to get together and talk about accessing capital. They have finally had the opportunity to figure out how they're going to roll out these support and stimulus packages, and they are ready to answer questions. May the 7th, with our friends at Business Sherpa Group, they are going to talk about the opportunities and challenges in the talent market for SMEs. And on May the 12th, we're going to have Kevin Savoy of Binan Business Consulting. He's going to talk about the 3 roles of the business owner. And I'm also really, really pleased to share with you that we are launching a new webinar series on Wednesdays at 1 p.m. starting on May the 6th. We're calling this series Wellness Wednesdays. Ottawa Board of Trade knows that the only way that we can ensure our economy is going to recover is by safeguarding everybody's health and well-being. Our very first Wellness Wednesday presentation is coming from St. John's Ambulance, and they are going to talk about mental health first aid, and I am looking forward to that. I see that we have Patty Murphy in our audience today, and Youth Services Bureau is also going to participate in that webinar series, we hope. So I would like to just say one final thank you to everyone for joining us today, and I will turn this back over to Mark Sutcliffe so he can monitor and moderate our questions.
Okay, and I guess we're asking people to put their questions into the chat space, Lynn. Yeah, so if you have a question, please just type it right into the chat area, and we'll try to answer as many questions as we can in our remaining time together. Also, feel free to share your own feelings about where you're at and what you see in the future. Just go ahead and type your comments in.
Does anybody want to start off with a question for this team? Don't tell me they answered every single question you could possibly have.
Somebody brought up mental health. I'm going to just throw this out while we're waiting for other questions. You know, what are some of the things, maybe Jim and Colleen, you can speak to this, what you're hearing out there. First of all, in terms of how people are looking after themselves, which I think is really, really important for CEOs and business owners, because I've talked to a lot of business owners in the last few weeks, and, they're worried about their clients, they're worried about their employees, they're worried about their parents, they're worried about their children. And at a certain point, you kind of have to ask them, like, hey, what about yourself? Are you looking after yourself? So that's a big part of it. But also, making sure your team is okay. And I know that there have been some people who've been surprised to see that even some of their employees who are saying they're doing okay are actually finding it really stressful. So, Colleen, some thoughts on that?
Yeah, it's a good point. And I think, this is a time for leadership, right? And certainly your employees is a big piece of this puzzle, and we do want to make sure we're taking care of them. So I think, talking to them one-on-one is really important, and having those check-ins. I also think this has created, as we all know, ways to interact with people that we've never done historically, whether it be personally or professionally. So, as you know, in our team, we've had happy hour, right? I mean, we never had happy hour remotely ever before, and things like that. So I think there's things that we can do from being cognizant of leadership is really important. I also think, on a personal note, like you said, there's so many priorities for us, people, customers, parents, children. And it's like anything, if you're not taking care of yourself, you are not going to be effective in helping others. So you actually have to just make it a priority. And I mean, if it means going out for a run, you have to do that. And again, the only advice I've got from that is schedule it. Otherwise, your day just gets filled up before you know it.
And make sure you get enough sleep too. That's important. Jim, some quick comments from you.
I was going to mention sleep as well. It's I'm probably not the best person to be giving advice on taking care of yourself, because I haven't been doing a very good job of it over the last 6 weeks. And I think, though, when I look at my calendar over the next few days, it's starting to open up a little bit. I'm hoping that we're moving from the acute phase, where we're really figuring out what to do in the short term, to the chronic phase, which will last for a period of time as we slowly get into the new normal of a less austere lockdown. But I agree with Colleen. I think making time for it, but also being willing to try new things. Like when I was younger, I used to love running, and I haven't been a runner as an adult. And so, I've been following your advice, Mark, and likely going to take up running. That's new for me.
Well, you can go for a run with Mark.
Yeah. At a distance.
Like keeping up.
You have to start with a marathon, though.
Yeah.
Okay. Great.
2 meters apart. I'll run to your house, Jim, and then we can go for a run from there, and then I'll run home. Okay, we have a couple of questions in the chat. Walter is asking, what are some techniques that can be used for innovation? Mike, do you want to share some thoughts on just how to start that process?
Sure, and Mark might want to weigh in here too, because I know he spends time on this one in his group. In general, innovation is a little bit of craziness with a certain amount of discipline. And so really innovation comes down to setting aside the time specifically and in the investment as well to partition off time and investment into innovation. And you really want to do it with people who really do have a bit of a crazy streak to them. And so that innovation has to come from the outside, in the sense that, if you're so embedded in what you're doing today, it's not likely you're going to be innovative. You look at the large companies, I don't care if it's Cisco or any of them, their innovation tends to come from acquiring companies. And so innovation is not something that's done easily inside a larger, even a bit small company. It's got to be done by bringing people in that have that slant, if you will, to do things a little crazy and support them at it.
Mark?
I just had to unmute. Well, I think Jim brought up a really good point. If you're a senior executive, CEO, belonging to a peer group, a peer advisory group, where you'll share ideas from different industries, is also very helpful. I think the most important thing, though, is, and Mike kind of alluded to it, is put a formal process in place. I mean, the stats show that only 20% of CEOs have a formal process of innovation, which includes your competition. Imagine if you do that and your competition doesn't have it, you'll be far ahead. And one of the really good sources of innovation are your own customers. What are you not providing, or what do they need that is not being provided in the industry? And also, if you're looking at process innovation, business model innovation, maybe a really good source is your own employees in that side as well.
Yeah, I always think, Jim, of Terry, one of the biggest lessons I've ever learned from Terry Matthews from the times I've spoken with him or seen him speak is, just the sheer amount of time. People think of him as a technology guy and engineer, but it's the amount of time he spent with customers all the time, right?
Yeah, that's very true. I think and you'll learn a lot from your customers. They'll tell you what they need. But with regard to Walter's question around innovation, I think probably the fastest path to innovation is by copying other people. So thinking that you have to come up with all the brilliant ideas and trial them out and then put them in place, that's possible. People may do that, but more often than not, the kind of innovation we're talking about in terms of how to respond to COVID-19 it's already happening. So how can you find access to it and copy it? And then the challenge for each of us is our willingness to move fast, doing something different, overcoming our fear to implement something which we weren't doing before, for which we don't have confidence yet or certainty yet. So it's really about copying and speed and overcoming our fear.
And Mark, I just add, because along with Jim, we kind of came up through that Newbridge era. And Newbridge did set aside, I know I sat on the boards that set aside money and time and people to innovate. But the reality is we just made better multiplexers. And it wasn't until we saw our competitors with some stuff that was really interesting that we said, oh, we better do some innovation in that area. So it kind of speaks to Jim's point. Mm. The other thing that drove innovation there, though, was literally separating the development team into, in Carrot Terry's case, the various subsidiaries that sprung up and were very innovative. And the idea of having a skunk works completely outside of the core R&D team is another good way to do it.
Okay, there's also a question about supporting employees working from home to help them be productive. And I think this is really important because there is I've talked to quite a few people who are sort of defaulting to the idea that, oh, everybody's, you know, this is better for everyone that you're working from home and everybody's going to want to work from home going forward. But it's important to remember that not everybody has the space to do it, the inclination to do it effectively. Some people might be at home and there, you know, there's a 2-year-old or a 1-year-old in the house as well, which can, you know, needless to say, limit productivity. So it's challenging. I was speaking with a business owner a week ago who was really struggling with one team member who was really finding it hard to get work done in the home environment. So some quick tips on that. Who wants to go first on that?
I mean, if I can start, a couple
Sure.
things that come to mind. So one is just the tools, right? That's an obvious one. Even things like I bought a sit-stand desk, which I've never had in my life, but I realized very quickly that I can't sit here all day. So, and I think I'll be working remotely more in the future. So creating, the tools I think are helpful. I think people need structure, just like anything. And so helping build structure into their day will support, particularly people that are extroverted and need connection. And then to your point, people that are really, have personal situations where they've got these little children running around, perhaps flexibility, right? So being supportive from a flexibility perspective, I think is important.
Great.
I'll just jump in with one other thought, Mark, and that sort of piling on, I guess, and that is connection. So we're used to in the office having people drop by and ask how things are going. We have the social connection. We have the corporate connection as well of talking to our colleagues and manager, whomever. That's absent in the work from home environment. So building that in, both in a structured way, but also spontaneously. So I think it's really important for folks to be open to that kind of interaction and actually initiate it. So I would say folks who are working from home, one of the risks is that you become isolated just because you're just focusing on the meetings. And by that, I mean, you're not having the spontaneous discussions with the folks that were part of the rich experience of working from home. So connection.
And I'd just add, Mark, this really puts a lot more onus on the management and the supervisors to be reaching out on a routine basis and checking how do you do against your to-do list. The discipline around the to-do list is even greater in this environment.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you for those answers. Do we have time for one more question, Lynn? I just saw one pop into the...
We have 2 outstanding questions.
Okay.
One of them is from Amanda, and I just want to see where that went. Okay, so Amanda wanted to know, the government has released a tiered comeback plan, and what she's asking is, do you think that for those companies in the final tier, that last tier of reopening, will there be new or different subsidies or packages available for them?
I'll jump in. I can't predict what the government will do, but I think our government in Canada has done a fantastic job responding to COVID-19 and providing support for businesses. And if we base what's likely going to happen in the future on what's happened in the past, I think the probability is good that the government will recognize, both the federal as well as the provincial and municipal governments will recognize the impact of a tiered approach and respond accordingly.
Okay, and then I think there was one that was just added
From Simon? Yeah.
from Simon. Yeah, he writes, it was mentioned that life things will not go back to normal for some time, including how companies operate, assuming the virus has worked through a large portion of the population, and with or without virus quarantine of healthy ends. How do you think business practices will be significantly changed with or without the vaccine? So how are, I guess he's saying regardless, how are business practices going to be changed by this, with or without a vaccine? Are you ever going to shake hands with anyone again, Jim?
Yeah, I think we'll revert to hugs. Much better.
Do you think that the way we do business is going to fundamentally be changed by this?
No, I don't. I mean, some aspects of it will, like we were talking about the use of video conferencing. I think we'll, for international sales, we'll rely much more heavily on video conferencing and local sales as well, but especially international than we have in the past. But I think ultimately, we as a human society have demonstrated time and time again that we tend to revert to the norm. And I think we'll be back to shaking hands. I think we'll be back to our cultural norms, not by the end of this year, maybe not even in early 2021, but probably in 2021.
Yeah, I used to always say video conferencing and video collaboration is a great tool to support the main tool, which is still getting out and meeting people as often as you can. And so if you perhaps every quarter go to meet people face-to-face when travel to get there, you will now probably every other week meeting them over a video conference, which you might not have done before.
Okay.
Fantastic.
Lynn, Su-Ling, back to you guys.
Well, I have nothing more to say to add to this conversation other than thank you all so very much for putting all this time and effort into today. I think the content was amazing and very, very helpful. Su-Ling, do you have a final thought for today?
No, just to say thank you to our presenters for sure. And we're very fortunate to have a company like yours supporting our business community, and even more so that you've been able to contribute in this way. So thank you. And to all of our business owners and our workforces, I think what we've seen here is an unbelievable amount of resilience, and that will take us through 2020, and my expectation is we will surpass all of our goals as we move into 2021 as well.
Awesome. All right, everybody have a wonderful day, and hope to see you on future webinars.
Thanks for the opportunity.
Thank you, everybody.
Great job, Mark. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thanks, Mark.